All right, today's day chair, Len Cheragino. He is a 40-year veteran of the securities industry. Companies throughout the United States and Europe call Len during periods of intense media scrutiny and corporate change. He has been doing investor relations for 32 years and has been advisor to more than 70 management teams over that time. We just learned during the table intros that he is heading into retirement. Len, I hope that was public, because it is now. What only a few people know is that Len interfaced with Army officers of the Soviet Union for 4 months at the height of the Cold War. Len, please come to the podium and introduce our short program.
How many of you remember the banking crisis? I certainly do. Yeah, I lost 5 clients. In 2008, nationwide, we lost 5 clients. They were shut down. And most of it had to do with the lousy economy and with mark-to-market accounting. To cite an example of the mark-to-market accounting, a few years ago, a client of ours, a developer, wanted to buy some land, and he had a plot laid out to build about 30 homes on this land. Went to my client. They had it appraised at $1 million. They loaned $750,000. That, before the developer broke ground, he went bankrupt. So it went into REO, real estate owned. And they had they were then the owners of this land, once again, a piece of agricultural land. And it was appraised again at $90,000. $650,000 under because of mark-to-market accounting. That $650,000 was a hit to their capital. This was not a management screw-up. It had to do with mark-to-market accounting. By the way, my client held onto that land through as the economy recovered, and they sold that land for $750,000. They totally recovered, their loan on it. Here to give us the short program is the state's Department of Financial Institutions, the head of the banking regulation. This DFI, the Department of Financial Institutions, regulates the banks. They have a head of credit unions. They have a head of mortgage banking, consumer loans companies, securities, industries, et cetera, that they regulate. And here to give us an update on the state of the banks in the state of Washington is the head of the banking division in the DFI. By the way, he was formerly the president of the Seattle Home Loan Bank here in Seattle, and he's a former Rotarian down in Houston. Rick Riccobono.
Thank you, Len. So when I told Len I would speak, I didn't catch the part that I was the short program. He's telling me 9 minutes. I said it to my wife this morning. She says, you can't even shave in 9 minutes. What can you do in 9 minutes? So I guess we have to make this quick. I usually speak to bankers. So, the director of banks, I get whatever time I want, and they never give me the hook. But they got a clock going down over here, so I got to get started. So, just to sort of put this all in perspective, I guess, let's talk about banking in the state of Washington. I'll take you back to 1992 because that's the easy numbers. It's sort of like just as we finished off the last banking crisis, which was the savings and loan crisis. But at that point in time, the United States had 13,973 banks, roughly just shy of 14,000 banks. 125 of those 14,000 were headquartered here in Washington State. Move forward to the end of 2007. I put that because the crisis really, if you want to identify when did it really get rocking and rolling, I guess you could say 2008, right? Just probably the beginning of that. So nationwide, we were down to 8,544 banks nationwide and 97 headquartered in the state of Washington. As of December 31st, 2015, we had nationwide 6,279 banks. And I would compare that with, if you really just go back to 1985, where we had 18,000, so we're down to about a third of what we had in 1985. Here in Washington, 52 banks are headquartered and operating in the state of Washington, with assets of around $65 billion. Now, I say that, I contrast that, there are more than these 52 banks operating in Washington, but of course, the larger national banks are not headquartered in Washington, they're outside. Okay, so how many did we lose in the crisis? And this is really important because, let me assure you, not only from my own prior business experience, but this is just how it works. Credit is the lifeblood of an economy. And I don't care if that's the US economy, the state of Washington, city of Seattle. Credit has to flow or there will be no growth. Anyway, we have this bad habit in America. We have crises from time to time, and there's been quite a few in banking over the years. And our reaction to it is always one of, in search of the guilty, punish the innocent, and then pat ourselves on the back, assuring ourselves it will never happen again. That's how we do it. And so anyway, it's kind of sad because at the worst time, when you need credit the most, because we're going into a recession, we are jumping on these institutions, these banks, and they are pulling back. And of course, people will say, well, Rick, your banks are not lending. We need them to lend. And I say, well, you need to talk to Congress, because they've passed laws now that we have new capital requirements, but we won't be seeing those for a couple of years. So can you imagine all of you doing business not knowing the rules that you have to operate under? So anyway, that puts a tremendous uncertainty in the process. Banks are cautious, very cautious about lending. They're busily cleaning up what's going on. Anyway, we closed 20 banks in the state of Washington, and the most recent was Hometown, a small national bank. They shrank it from 25 million down to about 5 million. That was just closed October 2nd. And I don't even remember seeing it in the newspaper. It may have been in the local one. It's down in Longview. So you see, today, they go quietly. They weren't like the beginning of the crisis. But not all, we haven't finished really shaking out all the problem banks that have fell out of the crisis. Now, I want to share with you the best kept secret of all of this is Washington State. When you look at a percentage of the banks closed, versus what we had, we were the third worst state in the country for bank failures, only behind Georgia and Florida. And so I was fortunate, in the whole time we were working the crisis, nobody ever pointed that out, because I don't think that's good for the state. So, but nevertheless, you know what we shared with Florida, and more importantly Georgia, is we had tremendous growth. So Washington was growing, and we were building homes and developing and building homes, and jobs were plentiful, and so we were kind of rocking and rolling as well as those states, and unfortunately the music all came to a sudden stop, and that's when people got hurt. Now, of those 20 institutions, 2 were closed because of massive mortgage fraud, and you read in the paper, you know who they were. That happens. It's happened before my career. I've been banker regulator now. I've seen it before. It happens. And we have to be guarded for it going now as we continue out of this recession. But 17, they were bad loans, bad investments, and mismanagement. And then there was the one, Washington Mutual, which was the largest bank headquartered in the state, $300 billion. And I want to share with you, it didn't fail in the traditional sense. It was closed by the federal government because they were afraid. They declared that it was illiquid and that they need to close it. But I assure you, they were not even close. They had just gotten an infusion of capital, $7 billion, from an investment outfit down in Texas, and they only had to put 3 of the 7 into the depository in order to make that well capitalized on the PCA capital standards, and that the examiners signed off on the sufficiency of the reserves. And no sooner did all that happen, it was closed. So I like to tell people, you have to realize that was not your traditional bank failure. That was the heavy hand of the federal government, deathly afraid that if that bank went down, it would take the deposit and insurance fund with it. Well, let's go back to those 17, bad loans and investments. What's that about? Well, that was a lot of commercial real estate loans. Again, as I said before, we had a lot of development, so the bulk of those commercial real estate loans were acquisition, development, construction lending. So, and all that stems from that. Once you you develop a subdivision, a community, and then up pops all of the strip centers and the small businesses surrounding that, and you sort of create that hub of activity. And so we had a lot of that. And banks just overextended themselves. You should only do so much of that. And because there was money to be made, it went too far in many cases. And when real estate precipitously dropped, under the rules, most of those ended up having their capital wiped out. The other huge contributor to this on the investment side was what Len talked about, mark-to-market accounting. One of the silliest principles, accounting principles ever adopted. In fact, it was adopted a long time ago. And it was adopted in the 30s, and finally in 1938, they convinced the president to get involved and to stop it. And for all that time, up until almost 9/11, it was shelved. And just before 9/11, they put it back into place, mark-to-market accounting. 9/11 happened, and they withdrew it. And lo and behold, they finally get their way. This is the FASB, and they put it in place 2007. It's a silly concept. The concept is simple. You determine whether or not your investment may be impaired. That is, you'll lose $1 of principal or interest sometime over the life of the instrument. And if you do, it's impaired. And now you have to go out and write it down to what you could sell it today in the marketplace. It makes no sense, and all it does is destroy capital. And it destroyed a lot of these institutions, or at least those that had substantial investments subject to market accounting. And then lastly, I tell you, we just had, unfortunately, what I talked about before, a kind of a over-aggressive FDIC. One of the problems I think you have with, the deposit insurance fund being a safety and soundness regulator is they're always worried about the insurance fund. So I'd always tell people, my job, first and foremost, is the economy of the state of Washington, and secondly, that deposit insurance fund, because our community banks, our banks can't run without deposit insurance. When you look at the FDIC, and Stan Ivey, who runs the regional office down in San Francisco, his number one mission is protect the insurance fund. And so we saw that. We saw that time and time again in these institutions where they came in and they argued about what stuff was worth, and it was written down. And sometimes as bad as what Len just told you one of his clients were. They come in, and this is really the sad part, even performing loans that are paying on time and have been, you'd have to write those down to the extent they were collateral dependent loans. So you didn't have recourse back to the borrower, just the property itself. And if that were the case, then you have the property appraised. Well, of course, have it appraised at a time when it's probably at its lowest value, and you write your loan down to what it is. Anyway, like I said, we're our own worst enemy. With this, we engaged in this in droves, and it not only hurt the banks that we closed, but it hurt everyone across the board. So if you take a look at really how we rate banks. We rate banks on a scale from 1 to 5. We don't share that with the public, what each bank is rated. We do it sometimes in generalities, like I'll share with you now. If you look back at the height of the crisis, about 2011, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the best bank, 5 being a bank that's going to get closed. And I have 1 minute left. I got pages yet to go. Okay. Anyway, we rate on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being the best, 5 being the worst. And I would tell you, at the height of the crisis, 2/3 of our banks were rated 3, 4, or 5. And so unsatisfactory being, the 3 being the best out of that, unsatisfactory, the others, 4 is you're on your way to death's doorstep unless you can get recapitalized, and 5, you're already lined up to go to the FDIC. Today, I can tell you, I can report on the state-chartered institutions, and there's 48 out of the 52 that I spoke of in the state. The 52 are national charters, the 48 are state charters, and we have, I think a total of 48 state charters, of which 8 remain sort of in unsatisfactory condition. Nobody's in danger of failing. In fact, everybody's got plenty of capital and reserves. Of the 8 institutions, 6 of them are all about earnings. They haven't recovered yet, but they will. And the other two are still working out problem loans, but have the capital to do so. So it's really kind of a timing difference. The good news is there is loan activity going on. And unfortunately, it kind of tracks the unemployment in this state. And if you look at this map, it's only the white counties, Snohomish, King, and two counties, Whitman out east, and Asotin. That's all right. He called me Riccobono. It's Riccobono. So anyway, it kind of tracks this. That's loan growth. Here's the problem. They're making new loans. The banks in Washington are making loans. They're looking to make loans. But they also have loans paying off. And just slightly, good news is they're making more loans than those paying off. So net they're up, but they're only up slightly. I tell you just quickly, the timekeeper. Somebody duct tape her to the chair. The capital in our industry in Washington, north of 10%. It's solid capital, and that's across the board and all of our banks. Asset quality, portfolios are clean. They have very little real estate left on their books. Nobody's done any exotic investments trying to earn some money. It's great liquidity. It's as high as it's ever been. In fact, too high. They probably need more loans and less cash investments. Interest rate risk, they're all positioned and hoping rates will continue to rise a little bit. See, for banks, unlike business, these low rates are killing us. We can't get any more juice out of the liability side, the deposit side, but every time a loan is written or every time it's rewritten, it's made at a lower rate, and so less spread. So it's putting a lot of pressure on the banks. Their earnings, if you look, they look strong. You see that reporting, but for the most part, that has a lot to do with not having to post reserves, taking back some of those reserves because in most cases they are over-reserved. And I'm out of time. Thank you.